when I wasn't having any compassion for myself, I didn't have much for them either. It's like, well, I had it hard too, kids, buck up.
Yeah. I would say things like, you're never going to survive in this world if you can't handle eating lunch, like, come on. Because I was so scared because of the things that were too hard for me. Yeah. And so I couldn't tolerate it in my kids. It was so vulnerable and scary to see it in them because I hadn't forgiven myself for all the things I struggled with. Now, though, I've been able to make this switch after years and years of practice, where if my kids do something that triggers a lot of discomfort in me, I can be not thankful. I won't say thankful, but I can be like in a space of, oh, this is a clue, right? This is a clue, because that means that there's something in me that doesn't feel comfortable in this situation because of unresolved stuff for me. And getting to the place where you see that your discomfort is your responsibility, that's freedom right there. That's the
right.
That's
such freedom. Yeah. It's so relieving, right? It relieves us from so much suffering. So it gives us freedom from suffering when we start owning ourselves and realizing, like, it's only when you own yourself that you can make changes. You have power once you recognize that it's your responsibility. People often say in front of me that he made me feel XYZ. And I'm like, well, people generally can't make you feel something unless they're punching you in the nose and then they're making you feel that pain. But, the general feelings we're feeling, we're feeling because it's who we are and how we're experiencing it. And we actually have the power to change how we're seeing it and experiencing it if we own it.
I had such low emotional intelligence. Like, I didn't even understand that emotions pointed to an internal experience. To me, emotions were other people's fault. Anything I felt was caused by other people. The outside world was to blame. Like, if I'm having a bad day or something's hard for me, I would think, what are they doing to make me feel this way? And I wasn't raised in a house where we thought about the internal experience at all. But I didn't even know until people started saying things like, where's that in your body? What kinds of thing is that bringing up for you? And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't understand what you're even saying. And then I remember telling my kids, I think they're called feelings because you feel them. My kids were like, okay. But it's so funny. I was just not raised in that world. It didn't occur to me. It was all very new. Of course, I couldn't teach it to my kids because I didn't know it myself. But once I learned it, that was the path forward.
Yeah. That's a big part of helping our kids heal is using reflection, right? Like, oh, when you hit your brother, what were you feeling inside? Did your chest hurt? Were your fists doubled? Were you sweating? What was happening? And a lot of times kids who come from difficult beginnings, they'll say, oh, I felt it in my head. And I'm like, well, I think that's a thought. So let's see if next time you feel like hitting your brother, you could check in and see what might be happening in your body too. So that's the sort of step-by-step piece, right, of figuring it out. And sometimes it starts with the parent. And then the parent, once you start getting better at that, you can go, oh, my kids need to know this too.
That was the beginning of getting out of shame, because once I had that piece, I had more knowledge for those difficult moments. I was sort of working from nothing, trying to white knuckle myself through moments where I was doing things that weren't in alignment, where I was trying to use control to avoid emotions. I was trying to control my children with being big, being loud, being rigid, so that I didn't have to explore why I felt how I felt. But once I learned to identify feelings in my body, to identify what my fear was that was bringing all this emotion, what was the story I was telling myself, then I could see a way of doing it differently. But until I had that information, I didn't see any other way to parent. I didn't see another path. I was just trying to white knuckle it. But when you don't have any tools, you're just stuck in a circle. You're just round and round you go. You do something you're not proud of, your kid's backed out, you feel ashamed, and you just keep going round and round.
Right. It's a negative feedback loop and you're just stuck in it. That sort of makes me want to just explore control a little more, what the role of trying to control all this is and how it holds different kinds of things in place, right? So not just trying to manage behavior and through control. I remember thinking, I just need to put the fear of God in these children. And I don't even know what that meant because I'm not that kind of religious, but it meant scare them. I was scared of my mom. They're not scared of me, and they must be scared of me. I must make them scared of me. So I was trying to control them into being afraid of me. And I'm like, whoa, okay, there's something really that's not really right, probably. But
I had
it's
no
all I had. I didn't have any tools.
That's exactly right. I had no other framework for parenting. To me, fear was the only effective parenting tool, unless you just lucked out and got really good kids who just listened all the time, which I didn't seem to ever find. I didn't know any other way. That's exactly the same. I just thought I must not be being firm enough, consistent enough, rigid enough. I was erring in the other direction. I need to be more and more and more of this big, scary person, which
Mm-hmm.
left me feeling worse, worse, worse.
Yeah,
And it
me
obviously
too.
wasn't effective at all. Yeah.
Tell me what your thoughts are on control and how that fed shame.
For me, control was about avoiding emotions and feelings. It was about making other people not make me uncomfortable. So to me, control was about avoiding discomfort. And it wasn't just my kids' behavior. Maybe in the beginning it was my kids' behavior, but it grew to like my partner, to my appearance, to the way my home looked, because the more and more I felt out of control and scared, the more things I tried to control. And it was a downward spiral because the more I tried to control things, the less I felt in control of myself. I just kept lashing out, saying things, doing things I wasn't proud of, and it caused me to pull away. Obviously, it's a really convenient buffer when you're always worried about how clean your house is. You don't have to worry about if you have a good relationship with your kids. So I spent a lot of time and attention on control and not feeling things. And I was deeply ashamed of how I was prioritizing all these things that didn't matter. I felt so much shame about the focus that I had on the way my kids looked and acted and were
Mm-hmm.
perceived by the outside world. That was so important to me. And I knew in my soul, in my, the part of me that understands what's important in the world, that this was not a good place for me to be focusing. But it felt like the only way your parenting skills get assessed is by the way your kids are acting and the way that your kids look. I couldn't get them to be the way I wanted them to, so I controlled all the appearances.
Right. Which it kind of comes around to like sort of the expectations of parents, what it's supposed to look like. And we all have internalized, I don't know, some movie version of good parenting. And we're trying to look like it, especially when things are falling apart on the inside and we don't really know what we're doing. And it just feels like we're all drowning and at least we can make it look good. So then we have lots of examples in our culture, right, about what looking good is, but it's all just like, an airbrushed woman on a magazine. That's not a realistic woman, right? Real women don't generally look like an airbrushed magazine cover.
No. Most of us have like, a zit or a weird eyebrow. We're not those we're
Right.
not those women on the magazine covers, especially
Well,
if
they're
I
not
wasn't.
they're not those women either. They're
They're not.
hairbrushed.
They're not there
Which
either.
no, but I think the parallel is though that we try to look like we're good parents, and that requires controlling how people look and how they act and what we say about them and whether we come out into the light. Because I think what that's doing is keeping our true selves in the dark, and it's bringing forward just an image that we are hoping people will buy, and sometimes people do.
Sometimes it's funny though, the people that know, the people
Oh
that have
yeah,
been there, they can
oh
always
yeah,
see through it.
hmm yeah.
So for me, releasing control had to be one of the very first steps. And it
hmm
was terrifying. It was handing over control to my spouse in parenting decisions. It was my house not always looking perfect. It was my kids beginning to have some autonomy, which was deeply embarrassing for me and very hard because I had to start looking at me, like my own self. Why is this
hmm
so hard for me to let them be who they are and say what they're going to say and look how they're going to look? But it also was the beginning of me having space in my life. If you're micromanaging everything 24 hours a day, you don't have time to take care of yourself. And if you
hmm
don't have time to take care of yourself, you don't have time to process your feelings and to figure out what brings you joy and to have that counterbalance to how hard it is to parent these kids. So it's all intertwined,
Yeah,
or
it
it was
sure
for
is.
me.
So much is intertwined around the shame. I know one of the things that I was afraid of was getting caught or found out, as a bad parent or as doing things that were hurtful to my children, I was ashamed of that one, and I was also scared, right? So,
Mm.
I was controlling that too, like whether or not anybody could really know, because I was afraid that if they did know, then I would get into trouble too. Not only would I be drowning and feel so ashamed and feel terrible and out of control and all the things, and my kids were feeling that way too, then I would actually end up with some kind of really horrible thing happening, where now my kids are going to be taken away, and I might have to go to jail, and oh, I mean, that's how my brain went. It was like totally in this cycle of woo crash.
Yeah. Yeah, I called it circling the drain. Just
Totally.
this was a big moment. The first time we found a therapist where my son was going to be going to therapy appointments on his own, someone who I felt actually trustworthy, who actually understood and they weren't going to cause more damage than help us. I was going to leave him there and he was going to talk to them without me. That was
Mm-hmm.
one of the scariest things I ever did. And by then I knew better than to just pepper him with questions. What did you say? What happened? What did he say? Like I had progressed that far. But of course, in my mind, that's all I can think about. But I had gotten to the point where it was worth it. I was so afraid for my son's like mental health and well-being that I had gotten to the point where it didn't matter anymore if I got in trouble or if someone thought
Mm-hmm.
I was a bad person. But I had to get pretty scared for him, for his mental health, before I was willing to kind of break the seal and
Yeah, and
take
that
the
was
risk.
the same thing for me. It's like, well, these kids just need help though, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what it is, and so I've got to just come clean and not be so afraid and just see what happens. And nothing happened.
Nothing at
I mean,
all.
I just
That's
got
right.
help. I just got help. I mean, I had a hard time getting help because I went from one kind of not very good helper to the next not very good helper, because this was a long time ago and trauma informed therapy was not really a thing. It's a little easier today, although you can still have to shop around quite a bit to find somebody who really understands what's going on. But I did need help for my kids, and I went far and wide to find it. I went to trainings all over the world to learn about attachment and trauma. Luckily, I was a therapist, so I could get in the doors to those things
Mhm.
and hear the inside. I read all the books. And then I finally did go to therapy myself when the trauma was just like right in my face. Like, oh, this is about my trauma and it's intersecting with my kids' trauma. Oh, okay. Got to get some help.
That's an important step too. It's not just about helping your kids and
Mm-hmm.
biting your tongue, right? It's also that you really won't find peace until you go out and find the person that can help you. And that was hard for me, just to find someone who understood adoption, who wasn't saying things to me like, "Oh, they're so lucky to have you." And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Okay, well, that this isn't going to work. I'm going to have to
Right.
find somebody else because I'm going to have to spend a lot of sessions educating you and I don't have the money or the time to do that." That was a big one, is part of letting go of control and creating a little bit of space in my life to actually take that hour and find that therapist, or those many hours. Just give myself that little window of space to
Mm-hmm.
understand myself a little bit better, so that when my kid did something and something came up in me, I'd be like, "Oh, we talked about that in therapy. That's
Mm-hmm.
this wound. We don't need to respond. It's not important to respond to everything that makes us uncomfortable." The process of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, which was a new skill for me as an adult in my 30s, came through therapy. I didn't know anything about that or how to do that, or that I even was supposed to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That was brand new information for me. I thought I was supposed to
Mm-hmm.
do something about it. So getting comfortable with being uncomfortable came from therapy. And then that's when I was able to parent more in alignment with myself.